Have you ever wondered how long Meg Griffin would spend in prison if her actions were judged in the real world? Meg, the most underrated and mistreated member of the Griffin family. But when she gets a chance to shine, it's usually because she does something questionable. So let's find out, would Meg actually spend years behind bars? Get ready for a list of crimes ranging from innocent mistakes to some seriously concerning acts. Let's start with season 12, where Meg gets into a fight with a new bully at school. He threatens her, and on fight day, all the students gather to watch. The guy starts hitting her hard, and with every punch she takes, Meg transforms, going from pretty to not so pretty. One of the guys asks the bully to let her stay in her pretty form, but the bully ignores him. After taking all that beating, Meg decides to do something pretty different. She lifts up her shirt and shows her boobs to the bully and the whole crowd of students. In real life, Meg's actions could land her in some serious legal trouble. Flashing in public, especially in a school setting, could be considered indecent exposure. In the United States, indecent exposure is a crime that could lead to fines and, in more severe cases, even jail time. Also, the physical fight could lead to assault charges. In the US, assault is defined as an intentional act that puts someone in reasonable fear of harmful or offensive contact. Depending on the severity, the penalties for assault can range from fines to years in prison.
Listen, before we start, could you not hit me here? Because these are pretty sensitive. Oh.
In this episode, Meg is crying in her room when she hears a noise at the window. Upon checking, she discovers that Luke, her boyfriend, has escaped from prison. He tells her he couldn't stand being away from her for another second. Flustered and swept up by passion, Meg decides to hide the fugitive in her room. Between kisses and promises, Brian shows up at the door, interrupting the mood. He apologizes for snitching on Meg earlier, but soon realizes something's off when he hears noises coming from the closet. Luke comes out, and without hesitation, Meg tries to explain his presence. Brian, ever the voice of reason, reminds her that harboring a fugitive is a crime. Before they can figure things out, Peter enters, sees Luke in his orange prison jumpsuit, and makes the connection. He calls Joe, the cop, who starts a chase. Luke is recaptured, and Meg tries to intervene, but ends up getting arrested too for helping the fugitive. If this scene happened in real life, Meg would be facing serious legal problems. In the United States, hiding or helping a fugitive is a crime under 18 U.S.C. Section 1071. The law clearly states that it's illegal to harbor or shield someone you know is a fugitive from justice. Meg was well aware of Luke's situation, as he was wearing a prison uniform and even mentioned he escaped. By hiding him, she interfered directly with law enforcement, making her legal trouble even worse. The consequences would be harsh. Meg could face up to 5 years in federal prison and a fine of up to $250,000. In this episode, Meg Griffin faces a bullying situation that escalates to absurd levels. She's having issues with a new schoolmate, Michael, nicknamed Mental Mike, who physically threatens her, making it clear that a fight between them is inevitable since she spilled sauce on his clothes. Terrified by the idea of confrontation, Meg comes up with a desperate plan to avoid the fight. She records an incredibly suggestive video involving a hot dog.
Come on, really? Ooh.
Hoping the scandalous content will get her expelled from school before she has to face Mike. If this situation were real, Meg's actions could have significant legal implications in the United States. Producing and distributing suggestive material, especially as a minor, could put her in violation of indecent exposure laws or even illegal material production, depending on how the scene is interpreted. Even if Meg made the video just to get expelled, it wouldn't shield her from legal consequences. If the act were considered milder, like public indecency or improper conduct, Meg could face lighter penalties, such as fines ranging from $500 to $5,000, and possibly up to 1 year in a local jail, depending on the laws of the state. Meg Griffin becomes involved in one of the most controversial plots in the series. The story starts when Meg tries to convince her brother, Chris, to sleep with Kent, a guy she's obsessed with. In a completely inappropriate moment, Meg emotionally manipulates Chris, reminding him of an old coupon and even offering him $50 to get him to go along with her plan.
Oh my God, that's it.
What do you mean?
I mean, if I can't have Kent, then that's the next best thing. I've just got to get Chris to sleep with him.
Chris, confused and offended, refuses, saying he would never do that and that he's into girls, making it clear he's not interested in guys.
Oh, fine. I'll keep it in my bum. There'll be plenty of room. That's my sarcastic way of saying it's not gonna happen. Good day, Meg.
Desperate with the rejection, Meg decides to take more drastic measures. She gets her hands on some illegal drugs and goes upstairs with the intent to put them in Chris's drink, hoping it would knock him out so Kent could sleep with him. However, just before going through with it, Chris shows Meg a picture of a special moment they shared, which makes her hesitate and abandon her plan.
Hey, so can I have some of that Kool-Aid now?
No, actually you can't.
Still, the consequences of Meg's malicious plan come to light later when Kent enters Chris's room at night. He mentions that he expected to find Chris unconscious, as Meg had told him he would be. Chris, confused, calls Meg to the room, and she admits everything, confessing she planned to drug Chris to facilitate a hookup with Kent, and even admits to Kent that she lied when she said Chris wanted to sleep with him. If this episode happened in real life, the legal implications would be extremely severe. The act of planning or attempting to drug someone to facilitate a sexual encounter is a serious crime in the United States, classified as attempted sexual assault facilitated by a substance. According to US law, this is considered a felony, and the penalty for attempted sexual assault could include up to 20 years in prison, depending on the state and circumstances. Additionally, simply possessing and intending to use a substance to harm someone could lead to additional charges like drug possession and administering substances without consent, with sentences ranging from 5 to 10 more years in prison. Meg Griffin returns home after 3 months in prison, completely transformed. Instead of the insecure, mistreated teenager she once was, she knocks on the door and declares that now she's the one in charge of the house. Her family, shocked by Meg's new attitude, tries to understand what happened during her time in prison, but she brushes off their questions, making it clear she's taking control. When Peter suggests that he's still the man of the house, Meg violently assaults him with her bare hands, knocking his teeth out and leaving him unconscious on the floor. In another disturbing scene, she barges into Peter's shower holding a loofah, suggesting some very unpleasant intentions. Meg's violence isn't limited to just her family. At school, she faces off against the students who make jokes about her time in prison, brutally confronting them after filling a bag with soda cans. She attacks the classmates mocking her in the cafeteria, violently assaulting them before kissing one of the girls at the table.
Hey, Meg, are you gonna take those soda cans to the Shaw Skank Redemption Center?
Back home, Meg forces Peter to punch Stewie during an argument in the kitchen, showing complete control over the family. In an even more concerning scene, she forces Brian to drive her to a store, where she enters armed to steal money. The situation only resolves when Brian convinces her to return to her old self, ending her brief journey as a violent, intimidating figure. If these actions were analyzed under US law today, Meg would face a series of serious charges. First, the assault on Peter and her schoolmates would fall under assault and battery, crimes that vary in severity depending on the state, but often result in up to 5 years in prison and significant fines. The bathroom intrusion with implied violent intentions could be seen as harassment or threatening behavior, leading to additional criminal charges. The most serious offense, however, would be the armed robbery at the store. Under US laws, this would be classified as a Class A felony, with penalties ranging from 5 to 20 years in prison. Forcing Brian to participate in the crime could also lead to charges of coercion or intimidation, further complicating her legal situation. Now, Meg Griffin embarks on an emotionally complex journey when she agrees to be a surrogate for Bruce and Jeffrey. Initially, everything seems to go as planned, but the situation takes an unexpected turn when Meg gives birth to the baby. What was supposed to be a simple, well-intentioned arrangement turns into a personal dilemma when Meg develops an emotional attachment to the child.
So did I, Mom. But honestly, since Liza Judy Barbara was born, I feel like my life has purpose for the first.
When Bruce and Jeffrey come to pick up the baby, as agreed, Meg hesitates and says she can't hand it over, going against the terms they had previously set. The tension rises until the baby starts speaking a few words to its parents, helping Bruce and Jeffrey realize how much the child means to them. Still, Meg resists, bluntly claiming that the couple has no idea how to raise a child. Bruce and Jeffrey, however, sincerely argue about their desire to be parents and do their best for the child. This emotional exchange culminates with Meg reluctantly agreeing to give the baby to the couple at the end of the episode. If we look
In that case, I'll take a chance on you.
at this episode under US law, Meg's decision not to hand over the baby after birth would have serious legal implications. Surrogacy contracts are legally binding in many states, although the laws vary by jurisdiction. If Meg were in a state that recognizes surrogacy contracts, her refusal to deliver the baby could be seen as a serious breach of contract. In some cases, this could lead to civil lawsuits and even the loss of parental rights over the child, depending on the court's decision. Furthermore, the idea of taking drastic measures to keep the baby could, in the real world, be interpreted as illegal child retention or even parental kidnapping, depending on the extent of interference with legal custody decisions. This kind of accusation, though rare in surrogacy cases, could result in penalties ranging from 1 to 5 years in prison, along with significant fines. The episode shows Meg Griffin taking a radical turn in her life as she becomes a fervent religious fanatic. Initially, her conversion to religion seems like an attempt to find purpose, but it quickly becomes clear that her newfound faith brings out the worst in her personality. Instead of promoting compassion and acceptance, Meg becomes critical, paternalistic, and obsessive, determined to convert everyone around her, especially Brian, the family's outspoken atheist. Later in the episode, we see Meg carrying her religious cross with the intention of converting Brian. After some of her actions, she seems to succeed, at least temporarily, as she convinces him to join a book-burning event where they plan to destroy everything that's harmful to God, an act that exemplifies fanaticism in its most extreme form. If this situation were analyzed in real life, Meg's actions could be interpreted as harassment, hate speech, and even incitement to vandalism or destruction of intellectual property, depending on the state. In the US, acts like book burning could be protected under the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of speech, but only to the point where it does not harm others' rights or encourage violence. Inciting the destruction of intellectual works, especially in a public or organized context, could be considered aggravated vandalism or inciting public disorder, crimes that could lead to sentences of up to 5 years in prison. Additionally, Meg orchestrating Brian's social exclusion could be interpreted as discrimination based on religious or philosophical beliefs. While not technically a crime in many jurisdictions, it could lead to civil actions and lawsuits for emotional distress, especially if there's evidence that Brian suffered personal or professional harm due to Meg's actions. Once again, Meg Griffin takes her emotional neediness to disturbing extremes. The story begins when Meg is put in charge of taking care of Joe and Susie while Bonnie is away. She begins to misinterpret small gestures of kindness from Joe, like giving her a ride to school, as signs of romantic affection.
Hey, who's that? Your boyfriend?
Yeah, that's my boyfriend.
This obsession quickly intensifies when a schoolmate asks if Joe is her boyfriend, and instead of correcting the assumption, Meg takes the opportunity to say yes. Determined to keep Bonnie away, Meg takes drastic measures. She plants a weapon in Bonnie's luggage before her trip, causing Bonnie to be arrested at the airport on charges of illegal possession of a firearm. This premeditated act shows just how far Meg is willing to go to eliminate any obstacles to her plan. In one of the most uncomfortable scenes of the episode, Meg further inserts herself into the Swanson family's life by breastfeeding Susie in public, an entirely inappropriate and invasive behavior.
Oh God!
If these actions occurred in real life, Meg would face multiple serious charges. Planting a weapon in someone's luggage is considered evidence tampering and forgery, crimes that could result in severe penalties, including up to 5 years in prison and significant fines. Additionally, getting Bonnie arrested by involving airport security could be interpreted as false reporting and interference with public safety operations, crimes that could lead to sentences ranging from 1 to 5 years in prison, depending on the circumstances. Meg's obsessive behavior toward Joe could also be classified as harassment, especially given her invasive and non-consensual involvement in the Swanson family's life. Breastfeeding Susie without the parents' permission could be interpreted as misconduct or even child neglect, depending on the jurisdiction. While this accusation is more subjective, in some states it could lead to fines or even legal restrictions. Meg Griffin manages to make her situation even worse by taking her emotional instability to disturbing extremes. It all starts when Brian, in a gesture of kindness, accompanies her to the school dance. For Meg, though, this simple act triggers an uncontrollable obsession, leading her to believe there's a romance between them. The situation quickly spirals out of control, culminating in a desperate attempt to force Brian to reciprocate her feelings. Meg's obsession peaks when she kidnaps Brian and locks him in her basement, tied to a chair. He's forced to participate in a makeshift romantic evening. In an uncomfortable scene, Meg starts undressing in front of Brian and even sits on his lap, trying to create an intimate atmosphere. During this interaction, they discuss the word time while Brian tries to stay calm in the midst of the absurd situation. The scene is interrupted when police arrive. Initially, the officers try to manipulate the narrative to blame Brian, but Lois intervenes, making it clear that Meg is the one at fault for the entire situation. If these actions happened in real life, Meg would face extremely serious charges. The act of kidnapping someone, especially with the intent to force them to interact intimately or against their will, constitutes kidnapping, a felony in the US depending on the state. The penalty for kidnapping can range from 10 years in prison to life imprisonment, especially when combined with aggravating factors like attempted coercion. Additionally, tying Brian up and imposing her presence in an intimidating manner could be interpreted as false imprisonment and harassment, crimes that could add another 3 to 5 years to her sentence. Meg's behavior of undressing and trying to physically advance on Brian could be considered attempted sexual coercion or sexual harassment, depending on legal interpretation, leading to additional charges. In total, Meg's actions could result in decades of prison time, depending on the severity with which the charges are treated. If Meg Griffin ended up in court with all of her misdeeds scrutinized by the strict laws of the United States, the verdict would be clear. Our dear and troubled Meg would be looking at almost 91 years in prison. That's right, nearly a century in the clink for all the crazy things she's done. Let's recap. Harboring a fugitive, another 5 years, drugs for her brother, a lovely 20-year sentence, got violent after prison, add another 15, didn't deliver the baby as a surrogate, up to 5 more years, became a religious fanatic and burned books, another 5, tried to become Mrs. Swanson, 10 more years, kidnapped Brian, 30 years straight in the VIP section of jail, and to top it all off, flashing in the middle of school, just 1 more year, for good measure. Moral of the story, Meg really needs therapy, and we need to hope that real-world laws never make their way to Quahog. And that's it, folks. Hope you enjoyed this crazy journey through Meg Griffin's madness. I'm signing off now, but don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next videos. See you soon, and until then.